January 30th, 1968. Saigon, 2:47 a.m. The air smells like incense and burned paper. Firecrackers crackle in the distance. Sharp, festive pops echoing off concrete walls and shuttered storefronts. Red scraps of paper litter the streets, remnants of Tet decorations torn down hours earlier. The city is supposed to be asleep. The ceasefire is supposed to be holding. Private First Class Daniel Torres, U.S. Army, Military Assistance Command, Vietnam, shifts his weight at the guard post outside the U.S. Embassy compound. His helmet is loose. His rifle hangs low. Tonight is supposed to be quiet. Then the sound changes. It's deeper than fireworks. He feels it in his chest before he hears it again. A hollow thump, followed by the unmistakable rattle of automatic gunfire. Torres looks up just as a flash blooms at the far end of the street. Someone screams. A rocket-propelled grenade slams into the outer wall of the embassy compound, showering concrete shards across the pavement. Glass explodes. Alarms begin to howl. The ceasefire is over. Within seconds, men in black pajamas and steel helmets pour through the smoke, sprinting toward the gate. Viet Cong sappers, lightly armed, fast-moving, precise. They move like they know exactly where they're going. Because they do. Torres raises his M16 and fires as figures rush the perimeter. Tracers cut through the dark. The smell of cordite replaces incense. The street that had been celebrating the Lunar New Year moments ago is now a battlefield. Across Saigon, the same transformation is happening, almost simultaneously. Police stations erupt in gunfire. Radio stations go dark. ARVN headquarters are hit. The presidential palace comes under attack. At Tan Son Nhat Air Base, mortars rain down on runways and aircraft. And this is just one city. In Hue, North Vietnamese army units move through the ancient imperial capital under cover of darkness, seizing key buildings with terrifying speed. In Gia Nang, Nha Trang, Bien Hoa, Pleiku, attacks unfold in waves, coordinated to the minute. By dawn, over 100 cities, towns, and military installations across South Vietnam are under assault. The Tet Offensive has begun. In a command center miles away, Major General Frederick Wyand stares at a map lit by red and amber bulbs. Reports stack up faster than they can be processed. Radio calls overlap. Units request reinforcements that don't exist. The pattern is impossible to miss. This is not a local uprising, not a diversion, not harassment. This is everywhere. For years, U.S. commanders had believed the enemy was nearing collapse. Body counts were up. Enemy main force units were supposedly shattered. Intelligence assessments had grown confident, almost complacent. The Viet Cong were weakening. The North Vietnamese were stretched thin. Another year, maybe two, and the war would tip decisively. Tet shatters that narrative in a single night. Because what the enemy has just demonstrated is not desperation, but capacity. Coordinated planning on a national scale. Logistics capable of moving thousands of fighters into urban centers undetected. Command and control tight enough to strike almost everywhere at once. This didn't happen overnight. It couldn't have. Somewhere, U.S. intelligence missed the buildup, missed the movement, missed the intent. In the early hours of January 31st, President Lyndon B. Johnson is woken in the White House. His advisors speak carefully, choosing words that won't alarm, but the facts do that on their own. The enemy has struck Saigon. The embassy has been breached. Cities across South Vietnam are under attack. Johnson asks the same question again and again. How many? How widespread? How did we not see this coming? No one has a clean answer. Back in Saigon, Torres and a handful of defenders fight for control of the embassy compound. The Viet Cong have penetrated the grounds, taking cover in courtyards and stairwells. For 6 hours, the heart of American power in Vietnam is contested by a small, determined enemy unit. By mid-morning, U.S. forces regain control. The attackers are dead or captured. On paper, it's a tactical victory. But the image is already burned into the global consciousness. Viet Cong fighters inside the U.S. Embassy, gunfire in the capital, war on the doorstep of what was supposed to be secure. Television cameras capture the aftermath. Reporters broadcast images of smoke, bodies, shattered walls. Back home, Americans watch from living rooms that had been told the war was being won. The disconnect is jarring. In Hue, the situation is far worse. North Vietnamese troops hold large sections of the city for weeks, executing South Vietnamese officials and fighting street by street against U.S. Marines and ARVN forces. Ancient walls become firing positions. Mass graves will be discovered later. The fighting is brutal, intimate, relentless. This is not the war Americans had been shown on charts and graphs. This is not a dying enemy. Inside MCV headquarters, analysts scramble to reframe what's happening. Some argue Tet is a last gasp, a costly gamble that will destroy the Viet Cong. Losses are high. Enemy casualties are staggering. And they're right. Militarily, the offensive will fail to hold most objectives. The Viet Cong will suffer devastating losses. But something else has already been lost. Confidence. Because Tet reveals a truth that no body count can erase. The enemy can strike when and where he chooses. He can absorb punishment. He can plan patiently. He can synchronize across an entire country. And most dangerously, he can control the tempo of the war. For U.S. commanders, the shock is not just operational. It's conceptual. Everything they thought they understood about progress, momentum, and enemy capability is suddenly in doubt. If this was possible, what else was wrong? As the sun rises on January 31st, 1968, fires burn across South Vietnam. Helicopters lift off nonstop. Medics work without pause. Radios crackle with fragmentary reports. The Tet Offensive is far from over. But the assumptions that guided the war until this moment already are. January 31st, 1968. Saigon, 9:12 a.m. The city looks stunned. Smoke drifts lazily above rooftops. Burned-out cars sit abandoned at intersections where traffic should be choking the streets. Shattered glass crunches under boots as U.S. troops move cautiously through neighborhoods they were told were secure. Captain Richard Rick Coleman, U.S. Army Intelligence, stands over a folding table inside a commandeered school building. Maps are spread out, corners weighted with shell casings and coffee mugs. Red grease pencil marks multiply by the minute. Each mark represents an attack. They are everywhere. Coleman rubs his eyes. He hasn't slept. No one here has. Reports keep coming in, fragmented, urgent, often contradictory. But a pattern is impossible to ignore. This wasn't chaos. It was choreography. Units struck simultaneously across provinces, separated by hundreds of miles. Urban cells rose at the same hour. Rural forces pinned down reinforcements before they could respond. Supply depots were hit just as frontline units came under pressure. Someone coordinated this. Carefully, quietly. Coleman flips through intercepted documents recovered from a dead Viet Cong officer. Most are routine, movement orders, code words, political slogans. But one detail stands out. Dates, times, not vague windows, exact hours. This level of synchronization requires months of preparation. Couriers, safe houses, pre-positioned weapons. Fighters moved into cities long before Tet, blending into civilian life without detection. How did they move this many men? Someone asks aloud. No one answers. Because that question has already started echoing through command centers from Saigon to Washington. At MACV headquarters, General William Westmoreland listens as staff officers brief him. Enemy estimates are revised upward again. The phrase, last-ditch effort, is used repeatedly, like a charm meant to ward off doubt. But Westmoreland's attention is fixed on something else. The speed. North Vietnamese and Viet Cong forces didn't just strike widely. They struck fast. They appeared where they were not supposed to be, in numbers that defied previous intelligence. Some units moved more than 100 kilometers to reach objectives, without being detected, intercepted, or delayed. This wasn't a breakthrough. It was infiltration perfected. Outside Saigon, along roads and canals, South Vietnamese civilians watch columns of American armor rush past. Tanks and APCs thunder toward hotspots that didn't exist yesterday. Helicopters swarm overhead, kicking dust into the air. Firepower responds as it always does, but it feels reactive now, always a step behind. In Hue, Marine Lieutenant Colonel Ernest Cheatham walks through a devastated block of the city. Ancient stone walls are scarred by bullets. Bodies lie wrapped in ponchos, waiting to be identified. The enemy didn't just move quickly here. They moved deliberately. They seized radio stations, government buildings, key intersections. They knew which bridges mattered, which neighborhoods could be held, which ones only needed to be contested long enough to make a point. Cheatham realizes something unsettling. This wasn't about winning battles. It was about forcing reactions. Every U.S. unit committed to retake Hue is a unit not reinforcing Saigon. Every helicopter diverted north is one not evacuating wounded elsewhere. Every decision is being made under pressure, on enemy terms. The war is suddenly elastic, stretching in too many directions at once. In Washington, the Joint Chiefs receive briefings that grow more cautious by the hour. Analysts replay the same question in different forms. How did enemy units bypass surveillance? How did they avoid detection along known infiltration routes? How did supplies reach urban centers under constant bombing? The answers point toward the same uncomfortable conclusion. The enemy's logistics network is far more resilient and far more invisible than assumed. For years, U.S. strategy had focused on attrition. Kill enough enemy soldiers, destroy enough supply routes, and the war would grind to a halt. Tet proves the flaw. Attrition doesn't matter if replacement and movement never stop. The Ho Chi Minh Trail is part of it, but not all of it. Local networks matter more. Village support, hidden caches, foot movement that leaves no signature for sensors to detect. No engines, no radio chatter, no convoys. Just men walking. In Saigon, Captain Coleman finally sits down, head in his hands. He thinks back to months of reports dismissed as exaggerations, villagers claiming strange movements at night, trails appearing and disappearing, units slipping through areas supposedly cleared. Too quiet, too patient, too easily ignored. Now those warnings have names and dates attached to them. The Tet Offensive is still unfolding, but the damage to American assumptions is already done. The enemy has shown that he can absorb losses and still dictate tempo. That speed does not require vehicles. That coordination does not require visible infrastructure. That surprise does not belong exclusively to the side with satellites and aircraft. For the first time in years, U.S. commanders are not asking how to win faster. They are asking whether speed itself has ever been theirs. And if it hasn't, what else has been misunderstood? As night falls again on January 31st, fires still burn across South Vietnam. The offensive continues in waves. Some attacks repelled, others intensifying. The map remains lit. And the realization settles in, heavy and unavoidable. The enemy did not break the rules of war. He learned them better. February 1st, 1968. Washington, D.C. 2:27 a.m. The Pentagon never truly sleeps, but tonight it feels awake in a different way. Lights burn in offices usually dark at this hour. Telephones ring without pause. Couriers move briskly through corridors, carrying folders stamped top secret, their expressions tight, controlled. Inside the National Military Command Center, a wall-sized map of South Vietnam glows under fluorescent light. Red indicators blink on and off. Saigon, Hue, Da Nang, Pleiku, Kon Tum, Bien Hoa. More than 100 points. General Earl Wheeler, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, watches the map in silence. Around him, aides and analysts speak in clipped tones, careful with every word. The numbers on the reports in Wheeler's hands refuse to reconcile with what he is seeing. For months, commanders in Vietnam have insisted the enemy is weakening. Body counts are up. Enemy main force units are supposedly depleted. Intelligence estimates suggest the Viet Cong are on the brink of collapse. And yet, here they are, everywhere, at once. Someone finally voices the thought, hovering in the room. If they're this weak, an aide asks quietly, how did they do this? No one answers, because answering it means confronting something far more dangerous than a tactical setback. It means the foundation of the war's logic may be wrong. Back in Saigon, Captain Coleman reviews pre-Tet intelligence summaries. The language now feels surreal. Enemy morale declining. Logistical strain evident. Urban attacks unlikely. Each sentence reads like a confession. The truth is not that intelligence was absent. It was interpreted through expectation. American planners believed the enemy would behave like a conventional force. Husks of units needing rest, resupply, and regrouping after years of losses. They assumed the Viet Cong could not sustain large-scale operations without exposing themselves. They assumed exhaustion. But the enemy never planned to exhaust himself. He planned to endure. In the days after Tet begins, U.S. and South Vietnamese forces begin regaining lost ground. Firepower does what firepower always does: overwhelming, destructive, decisive in the moment. In Saigon, the U.S. Embassy compound is retaken. In Da Nang, attacks are repelled. In dozens of provincial capitals, Viet Cong units are driven out. Casualties on the enemy side are severe. By traditional metrics, Tet is a disaster for North Vietnam, and yet, the sense of victory never arrives, because the enemy does not behave like a defeated force. Captured fighters show no surprise at failure. Prisoners speak of Tet not as an attempt to seize and hold territory, but as a test of reach, of coordination, of reaction. In Hue, where fighting drags on street by street, the battle feels different. This is not hit and run. This is occupation, however temporary. North Vietnamese regular units dig in among ancient walls and stone courtyards, forcing Marines and ARVN units into brutal close quarters combat. Every block costs time. Every hour costs lives. Every delay amplifies the political shock already rippling outward. Television cameras capture it all. American living rooms fill with images that contradict official optimism. Burning cities, Marines crouched behind rubble, flag-draped coffins returning home. For the first time, the war's tempo is being set by what the enemy chooses to show. In Hanoi, the leadership watches closely. They never expected Tet to overthrow the South Vietnamese government outright. That was never the plan. The plan was psychological. Expose the gap between American claims and American reality. Force the United States to defend everywhere. Make the war visible, undeniable, uncontrollable. And above all, prove that time still belongs to them. Back in Washington, President Lyndon B. Johnson listens to advisors argue late into the night. Some insist Tet is proof the enemy is desperate, throwing everything into a final gamble. Others are less certain. Clark Clifford, newly appointed Secretary of Defense, reviews classified briefings with a lawyer's eye for contradictions. The enemy's losses are real, but so is their capacity to replace them. And capacity, not casualties, wins long wars. Clifford asks a simple question during one meeting. If this is them near collapse, he says, what does their strength look like? Silence follows, because no one can answer without admitting how little is truly known. The illusion of weakness had been comforting. It justified sacrifice. It promised an end. Tet destroys that illusion, not by winning militarily, but by revealing endurance, by showing that the enemy can absorb punishment and still coordinate across an entire country, by demonstrating that speed does not require machines, and that surprise does not belong exclusively to the powerful. As February wears on, U.S. forces continue pushing back. Tactical control is reasserted in most areas. Enemy units withdraw, melt away, disappear once more into villages, jungles, and borders no one can fully seal. The maps quiet down, but the damage is done. The question no longer whispered, but openly asked in secure rooms, is no longer, can we win? It is, what does winning even mean now? And for the first time, some are forced to confront a possibility they had spent years denying. The enemy was never weaker. He was waiting. February 6th, 1968. Huibres, 6:11 a.m. Dawn comes reluctantly to Hue, filtered through smoke and low clouds that cling to the perfume river like a shroud. The ancient citadel, its walls built centuries before Americans ever set foot in Vietnam, stands scarred and blackened. Captain James McDonough, U.S. Marine Corps, presses his back against a stone archway slick with moisture and soot. His platoon has been fighting here for 4 days, block by block, room by room. This is not the war he trained for. No jungles, no distant artillery, no clear front lines, just cities, and cities turn speed into chaos. The North Vietnamese army holds positions inside the citadel with a discipline McDonough did not expect. These are not guerrillas darting away at first contact. These are regulars, well-armed, well-coordinated, and patient. Too patient. McDonough realizes something unsettling as his men advance under covering fire. The enemy is not rushing. They are forcing the Marines to rush. Every delay draws media attention. Every explosion echoes beyond Vietnam. Every casualty compounds political pressure thousands of miles away. Speed, once America's advantage, is now being used against them. Across South Vietnam, the same realization is spreading. The Tet Offensive was not fast because it relied on vehicles or radios or modern infrastructure. It was fast because it relied on people. Messengers, foot couriers, local networks, pre-positioned weapons, safe houses prepared months in advance. In Saigon, intelligence officers begin reconstructing the timeline of the attacks. They trace routes, dates, patterns. The picture that emerges is unnerving. Units did not move in large formations. They did not converge dramatically. They filtered in quietly, one man at a time, one crate at a time, one bicycle, one footstep. By the time the attacks began, the enemy was already in place. Speed was an illusion. What mattered was readiness. At U.S. Military Assistance Command, Vietnam, MACV, analysts pore over captured documents and prisoner interrogations. Again and again, the same theme appears. Preparation without urgency. Movement without exposure. Coordination without visible command. American planners had expected the enemy to reveal himself in order to strike. Instead, he revealed himself only when he was ready to be seen. General William Westmoreland, commander of U.S. forces in Vietnam, faces an increasingly difficult task. Militarily, he can argue Tet was repelled. Politically, that argument is evaporating. The American public had been told victory was near. Tet says otherwise, and the enemy understands this better than anyone. In Hanoi, leaders measure success not in territory held, but in reactions provoked. They listen to foreign broadcasts. They read American newspapers. They track debates in Congress. They see doubt spreading faster than any division ever could. This is not accidental. The Tet Offensive was designed to compress time, to force years of unresolved questions into a matter of days. Can the U.S. protect its allies? Can it secure cities? Can it predict the enemy? Can it end the war? The answer to each question is not a resounding no. It is something worse. Uncertainty. On February 8th, Walter Cronkite travels to Vietnam. His visit will later become iconic, not because of what he sees, but because of what he concludes. The war, he will say, appears to be mired in stalemate. Not lost, not won. Stalemate. For the enemy, this is enough. Back in Hue, McDonough watches as his men clear another courtyard. The fighting is brutal, exhausting, and slow. Bodies are carried past him, some American, some Vietnamese, indistinguishable under dust and blood. He understands now that the enemy never needed to outrun America. They only needed to outlast its patience. The Tet Offensive is not about speed in miles per hour. It is about speed of realization, how quickly assumptions collapse, how rapidly confidence erodes, how fast political gravity asserts itself. By mid-February, most major fighting subsides. The enemy withdraws once more, leaving behind devastation, mass graves in Hue, and questions no one can bury. U.S. forces remain powerful, technologically superior, militarily capable. But something irreversible has happened. The war is no longer unfolding on American terms. The enemy has proven he can strike anywhere, anytime, without warning. And that knowledge spreads faster than any unit ever could. In Washington, discussions begin shifting, not toward escalation, but toward limits. Limits on deployments, limits on expectations, limits on belief. Tet did not defeat the United States on the battlefield. It defeated certainty. And once certainty is gone, speed no longer belongs to those with helicopters and jets. It belongs to those who decide when the war must be felt. March 12, 1968. Washington, D.C. 9:47 p.m. The room is quiet in a way war rooms rarely are. Secretary of Defense Clark Clifford sits at the long table, a stack of briefing folders untouched in front of him. Around him are men who have spent years measuring success in sortie counts, body tallies, and territory cleared. Tonight, none of those numbers matter. What matters is time. Not how much has passed, but how fast it is slipping away. Just weeks after Tet, the requests begin arriving from Vietnam. More troops, more resources, expanded authority. General Westmoreland asks for over 200,000 additional soldiers to stabilize the situation. On paper, the request makes sense. The enemy suffered enormous casualties. Most attacks were repelled. U.S. firepower still dominates. But Clifford has been reading the intelligence summaries differently than his predecessors. He is no longer asking, can we win militarily? He is asking something far more dangerous. How long can we keep convincing ourselves that winning means something? Across America, Tet has detonated in living rooms. Television screens replay footage of fighting inside the U.S. Embassy compound in Saigon, an image that should never have existed. Viewers watch Marines moving through ruined streets that look uncomfortably permanent. The contrast is devastating. For years, officials insisted the enemy was weakening, that control was expanding, that the end was visible. Tet shows the opposite. Not because the enemy was stronger than expected, but because he was everywhere. Speed becomes the central shock. How did attacks reach so many places at once? How did enemy units infiltrate cities undetected? How did intelligence fail so completely? Congressional hearings begin probing these questions. The answers are unsatisfying. The enemy did not rely on last-minute movement. He relied on time, months of preparation, years of infiltration, decades of familiarity with terrain and population. Tet was not fast. It was patient. And patience, once revealed, terrifies planners who depend on deadlines. President Lyndon B. Johnson feels the shift acutely. Poll numbers collapse, advisors fracture. The war, once framed as manageable, now threatens to consume his presidency entirely. On March 31, 1968, Johnson addresses the nation. He announces a partial bombing halt over North Vietnam. He calls for negotiations. Then he says something no one expected. I shall not seek, and I will not accept, the nomination of my party for another term as your president. In that moment, Tet claims its most powerful casualty. Not a city, not a unit, not a base, but momentum. In Vietnam, American troops feel the change immediately. Orders grow more cautious. Operations become more defensive. Talk of rotations intensifies. The question is no longer, how do we win? It is, how do we leave without losing everything? The enemy understands this instinctively. North Vietnamese leadership does not celebrate Tet as a battlefield victory. They acknowledge the losses. They grieve them. But they also recognize something historic. They have accelerated the war beyond America's tolerance. By forcing the conflict into American cities, onto American screens, they have collapsed distance. There is no longer a safe buffer of explanation. The war now moves at the speed of perception. Back in Saigon, U.S. advisors note a subtle but profound change in behavior. Allied commanders become risk-averse. Ambitious operations are postponed. Political considerations seep into tactical decisions. Speed, once America's weapon, now works against it. Every day the war continues, the question grows louder. What are we still here for? By late 1968, peace talks begin in Paris. They will drag on for years. But the war's direction has already been decided. Not by a single battle, not by a single city, not even by Tet itself. But by the moment American leadership realizes that no amount of speed, no surge, no escalation, no technological advantage can outrun a war designed to last longer than belief. Tet did not end the Vietnam War, but it ended the idea that time was on America's side. From that moment forward, the clock belonged to the enemy.